metal to spiff them up for presentation?
Inside the fence, there's a restoration and area. Overhead, you'll see the U2, the infamous U2. U2 was designed by Kelly Johnson at the Lockheed Skunk Works. From the time it was conceived to the time it first flew was a period of only 9 months. That's unheard of anymore. One of the reasons he was able to do that is because he took a fuselage of a F-104, which we have over there, took the nose off, the tail off, and put the wings on it, and that was what he used to design it. The U2, the concept was to fly high enough that it couldn't be defended against. At the time, we didn't think that the Soviets had anything that could get up to 70,000 feet. The U2 flew at about 70,000 feet, but it was quite slow and actually very difficult to fly because when it was at 70,000 feet, the range of airspeed between the structural limitation of the aircraft and the stall speed was less than 10 knots. So you had a very, very tight window that you were flying in as a pilot. U2 is still flying. This is one of the original U2s, the first production run of about 9 aircraft. Since then, the U2 has continued development. The latest ones, for a while they started calling them TR1s, but then they went back and said, nah, they're all U2s. They have large fuel tanks in the wings and multiple sensor capabilities. They're about 30% bigger than this aircraft, the newest ones. They're still flying for NASA, other agencies in the Air Force. So U2 has been very successful. Of course, the end of the true intelligence gathering over the Soviet Union was in 1960 when Francis Gary Powers was shot down. Now that changed a lot of things because now we knew that the Soviets had a missile that could get up to 70,000 feet. We no longer flew overflights of the Soviet Union in the U2 after that. I'll talk about the SR-71 in just a second. I just want to point out over here, we talked over there about the difference between rockets and missiles. These orange and white missiles over here are the first guided, air-to-air guided missiles that the Air Force purchased. They were carried initially on the F-102, also on the F-101 and the F-106. However, the F-102 was the first aircraft to carry them, and we had not gotten away totally from the rocket delivery systems. If you look carefully in the weapons bay doors, you'll see those openings there. There are 12 2.75-inch rockets in each one of the missile bay doors. So they actually still had the 2.75-inch rockets. Okay, the SR-71. So flying high, wasn't going to solve it. What did we do with the RF-86 over there? Fly as high as you can and as fast as you can. There you go, the SR-71. The SR-71, the Air Force admits to just over 85,000 feet, just under 2,200 miles an hour. Mach 3.5, 85,000 feet. The airplane, the exterior of the airplane is the majority is made out of titanium to resist the heat that's generated when it flies at that speed. Anybody know where titanium comes from? That's right, Russia. So when they were developing the A-12, the YF-12A, the SR-71, the United States government agency, every agency in the government had some kind of dummy corporation buying up titanium from the Soviet Union and funneling it into these programs. The airplane actually stretches 8 inches in flight. It leaks like a sieve on the ground. It never takes off to the full load of fuel. The tanker aircraft takes off about 45 minutes before the SR-71. The SR-71 takes off with minimum fuel, heats itself up, hits the tanker and fills up with fuel and goes and flies its mission. The nose cones are interchangeable for different kinds of sensors and intelligence gathering systems. Personally, I think the most amazing thing about this aircraft is the J-58 engine that powers it, and there's one on a trailer over there if you get a chance to go by. If you look at the placards down here on the very end, that engine morphs in flight from being a traditional turbojet engine at low speeds to at about Mach 2. It turns into a hybrid where it's taking air, compressed air from the airflow that's going in, and at Mach 3 and above, it's essentially a ramjet. It bypasses the compressor section of the engine and runs on that compressed air from the airflow. Amazing piece of technology. The airplane became operational in 1966, so that's 1950s, early 60s technology. Amazing. This whole row of airplanes here, we used to refer to it back in the 60s as a Century series, and with the F-100 over here. So we have the F-100, the F-101, the F-102, the F-104, the F-105 is over in the Southeast Asia Gallery, the F-106 down here, and F-4 over there, just as an example, the F-4, the Air Force called it the F-110 until the Department of Defense said, no, the Navy calls it an F-4, you call it an F-4. All those aircraft, except for the F-105 and the F-100, were interceptors. We were very defensively minded. The F-100, very versatile airplane. It's very, very useful. It ran through Southeast Asia. It was close air support aircraft. It did marvelous things. First supersonic aircraft that the Air Force purchased. All these, the F-104 was initially designed as a point defense weapon, an interceptor. It has a gun. The F-100 has guns. Only the F-105 out of this whole series of aircraft also has a gun in it. The F-4 got a gun later on. If you look underneath the F-101 here, talking again the rocket missile definition, that white weapon there is actually a rocket. It's called the AIR-2, the Genie. It is a nuclear weapon. The concept being, again, we're going to get a mass formation of bombers coming over here. What if we take a ballistic weapon, fire a nuclear warhead into the middle of that formation and obliterate the whole thing all at one time? The F-89, the F-101, and the F-106 all carry that Genie rocket, or capable of carrying the Genie rocket. It's only tested once over in the southwest United States. Scary weapon. A lot of the airplanes in the museum are here because they served some special purpose or they were on some really cosmic mission. The Thunderbird airplanes over there, the SR-71, very special aircraft. Well, this F-106 is here. Well, it's an example of the F-106, but this particular airframe is here because it flew itself, and it wasn't a drone. In 1970, it took off from Malmstrom Air Force Base with another F-106. They were out practicing what they called air combat maneuvering. This aircraft departed controlled flight, went into a flat spin. At the time, flat spin in a delta wing aircraft was considered unrecoverable. The pilot had to eject. Well, when a pilot ejects from an aircraft like this, the canopy goes away, the seat and the pilot leave the aircraft. So you got a change in aerodynamics, a change in center of gravity. He ejected. Guess what the airplane did? It recovered itself. And it flew a nice lazy spiral over North Dakota until it landed in a farm field. Nice gentle landing, just slid to a stop. If you look at the left-hand picture, you'll see there's a nice little curve to the right. The Air Force went out with a crane and a flatbed truck, picked it up, took it back to Malmstrom Air Force Base, repaired the underside sheet metal, dropped the landing gear, put it back out on the flight line. Well, obviously they had to replace the ejection seat and the canopy, but it flew again. Unverified story, but I've heard it many times, so I'm going to say it like it's the truth. About 6 years later, this airplane was assigned to Tyndall Air Force Base, which is a schoolhouse for the interceptors. The pilot who ejected from the airplane got the opportunity to fly the airplane again. This is the end of the Cold War over here. We have the chunks of the Berlin Wall. actually brought in real. The museum wanted to have a piece of East German technology to display with the wall to demonstrate how not so great things were in East Germany. They asked for one of these cars. They wanted one off the street that had been used and whoever provided it for us sent a brand new one. So all the distressing and nasty stuff on there was done by the museum staff. But it is an interesting example. It's a two-stroke engine. It's really not very good. So we'll keep moving around here. We have two examples of the F4. I call this one over here the Ultimate F4. It's an F4G. It replaced the F105G as a Wild Weasel aircraft. Massive electronics in there. It's quite an airplane.
My dad worked at McDonnell Douglas when they built those back in the day.
Cool. That's great. You'll see Soviet aircraft in here that were part of what was called the Constant Peg program. We had Air Force pilots that actually flew these airplanes against our aircraft so that our pilots would get an idea of what the capabilities, the true capabilities of these aircraft were. The program only lasted for a few years. They had the MiG-21, this MiG-23. I'm not sure what other aircraft they flew. They became too unsafe to fly, and they had to shut that program down. You can imagine we probably had real difficulty finding spare parts.
Yeah.
As we come over here, we've got the F-15 over there and the MiG-29 right here. The F-15 became operational in 1974. The MiG-29 became operational in the Soviet Union a couple of years after that. The reason, I don't know if it's the reason they're next to each other, but there was a lot of speculation that this airplane was built with a lot of stolen industrial espionage information from the F-15. When we actually got our hands onto the MiG-29, it had some very, very good characteristics. It had a helmet-mounted targeting system, so the pilot did not have to turn the airplane to go to target one of his missiles. He could identify it by turning his head and his helmet, fire the missile, and the missile would track to the target. It had an excellent look-down, shoot-down radar capability, which the Soviets had not had prior to that. However, we found that a lot of the other ancillary systems, defensive systems, things like that, on the airplane were not nearly up to snuff with the F-15. The F-15, like I said, became operational in 1974. This is an A model. We're currently flying C's and D models and F-15Es, which are two-seat version of the aircraft also, primarily interdiction kinds of missions. The Air Force is actually buying 24 new F-15s. They're called F-15EXs. Boeing has continued to develop the F-15 capabilities based on foreign military sales. They've been selling them to United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabians, Japan, South Korea, and actually one of the versions of the aircraft that's been continued to improve. It's got the F-15EX, which is the Air Force is buying. It's got new engines, new radar, new avionics, new defensive systems. And I read last week that they actually had a test where you can see on this aircraft it carries 4 radar-guided missiles and 4 infrared-guided missiles. They flew an F-15EX within the last month or so with 12 air-to-air missiles on it, with the plan that it's going to go up to as many as 18 air-to-air missiles. The F-15 has been an extremely successful aircraft operationally. If you take into account all the operators and all the air-to-air engagements that have involved F-15s, there have been either 104 or 108, I usually say 108, and the F-15's record in those air-to-air engagements is 108 to nothing. Very, very successful aircraft. Considered a Generation 4 fighter, the F-15EX is not up to the Generation 5 like the F-22 and the F-35. However, they kind of tout it as being a generation 4.5. It's kind of in between. This aircraft is kind of famous. It's the F-117, the Nighthawk, the stealth bomber, or a stealth fighter. I know it's called a fighter, but really it is a bomber. It carries 2 precision-guided weapons on it. I refer to it myself as the Air Force's zero-emission aircraft. Not talking about hydrocarbons, talking about electronic signature. When this airplane is flying its missions, it emits nothing. It navigates by a downward-looking, forward-looking infrared against a computer mapping system. So it doesn't emit any kind of electronic signature at all. No longer operational in the Air Force. It was very, very effective in the Middle East wars. One was shot down, and when the analysis was completed on that shoot down, it was the decision was that it was dumb luck, that it really was an anomaly. It probably would never have been shot down again under those same circumstances. So, no longer operational, but I have been told and I've read that there are a few you can see flying around out near Las Vegas. They use it for testing purposes, for stealth drones and things like that. That it still has characteristics that are useful to the research and development community. I don't have a verification of that, but that's what I've been.
Hello, visitors, and welcome to the National Museum of the United States Air Force. We invite you to join the free guided tour of Building 4, which features a full-size walk-on shuttle exhibit in the Space Gallery, the first airplane into Hanoi to